So a few things to think about when you're implementing an accessibility strategy, and you're starting especially to think about this from a long-term perspective, like what should I start to think about and put in place now that might help me continue moving forward, because accessibility is not a project, it's a process, and it will be something you have to continue to pay attention to. So the first thing to think about is just establishing buy-in. Like, who in your organization are the key stakeholders that may have the biggest and most direct on accessibility? Identifying those people and making sure that that you get their confidence, that they have a stake and a say in how things go, and finding out what they might need in their area of the organization to accommodate for accessibility is super important, right? And that's a theme that we'll probably hear throughout this, is that you've got to bring people into the fold and ask them, what do you need? How can we help you help us, basically? The other thing is understanding where you are right now really helps, right? What is your current state? And if anybody has heard of things like audits out there, that's a real direct example of coming in and actually auditing, we'll say, a public facing website, and saying, and I'd mentioned those guidelines before, here is where you're at variant, here's where you have gaps to these guidelines. And here's how you can address them. And here's how you can start to look at that in terms of priorities, right? Typically, when you start to assess what your current state is, you find that there's a lot of work to do and you can't do it all at once, right? So you start to think about things like priorities, but assessing that current state is really the first step to being able to understand those other things. And it's not just limited to the product, right? It's also your internal processes and services and all that kind of thing that overall support accessibility. And then just like establishing those buy-in for people in your different, your key stakeholders, people in different process areas, you've got to involve people with disabilities. There's a huge saying, nothing about us without us, in the disability community. And it couldn't be a more accurate statement. If you want to understand if your product can be used by somebody who's deaf that relies on an interpreter or captioning, then talk to that person. If you want to know if a person who's blind can use a screen reader effectively to access the content, that person, there's nobody better than that person to tell you whether or not what they need and whether or not that's being successful.